All right, so really quick in this video, I just want to kind of give an update about Brewmaster, how it's going, how it's feeling, and any kind of notable things that we're seeing kind of develop. Now, if we take a look at Raider IO, you're not gonna see a lot of green. Poa has been killing it. He has got mostly 16s this week, though it is still looking extremely competitive, so congrats to him. I think he's 1 key away, unless he got it last night. No, he might have gotten it last night. I think he was down 16 Rookery, I think, when I was looking before I went to bed. But big congrats there. I think he's the first brew to hit all 16s. Most of us are also working on them. But I kind of want to talk about some talents that I have personally been running, as well as we've seen some other people been running that have been making some of these keys viable. Because what I have noticed personally is, as a Brewmaster monk going into some of these keys, is that you might want to swap around a lot of talents depending on the key, depending on the level. And I don't think we saw that as much last season. I think eventually there was a very strict meta where you'd go in and you'd kind of just run the same talents almost in every single situation. Let's talk about it really quick. So I really like this site. I talk about it all the time. Just in case you're not familiar, it is called Murlok with a K, IO.io. And what this site does is it gathers data from Battlemet's API, and it presents the top 50 ranked players, give or take, and it compiles all of their stats to give you a breakdown to see what the top players are running. And I really like this site because of that. You're not getting this giant breadth of data that you get from like something like Archon or other sites that we've seen in the past. This gives you what the top players are running, and it'll give you a heat map of what talents people are playing. Now, there are some obviously like weird standouts that could be a mistake, like they're running these random like 1-point choices, but you're going to see like, okay, so most players are running like the same build. There's a couple of like, there's one flex point kind of in the middle of the tree here. You can swap between detox and pressure points. And then you're seeing like Iron Shell versus Expeditus, and you're seeing probably detox versus pressure points. So I love this site, but we're going to utilize this to kind of talk about some choices that might not be super popular. For example, One with the Wind and Strike at Dawn. And for some reason, August Blessing. I'm surprised to see people running this at all. I think it might be an oopsie on raid talents, because I've definitely done a key with raid talents before. Not as fun. But yeah, let's talk about kind of the shift that we're seeing, a slight shift. When it comes to your talents in your class tree, there isn't really anything special. There are some dungeons where you don't need detox at all. This actually comes down to being the majority of dungeons. There aren't a ton of dispels that you actually need to have. I would say detox is really notable in things like Theater of Pain. There's a couple of instances in other dungeons as well where you might need detox. Generally, though, if you are going to be running this, it's mostly because you just need to put the point somewhere, and it's not going to be used in pressure points either. So some people just run this talent just to run it. If you're ever like queuing into anything below a 12, you might grab detox for last week's affix, for example, which required you to dispel to remove the Xalatat's bargain. Generally, if you are going to play between the two, you're going to play detox and pressure points. But as you can see in the top 5, both Mordra and myself, for example, aren't running this, but you have Poa, Monksy, and Big Crusher running it. They might have been doing a key that required a dispel, where if you swap over to pressure points, you're seeing myself put a point into here. There's also a few instances where Jadewalk is actually not terribly undervalued. Like, you can get a good bit of movement speed when it comes to out of combat instances. So for example, Theater of Pain. When you're running through the halls in Theater of Pain, you're going to the run from Zav to either of the two wings. Well, you having an extra 15% movement speed is pretty valuable, despite even having 3 roll charges. You might want a roll charge for actual combat, but getting from like killing a boss and then getting to the next boss, it speeds up the ability to gather. So Jadewalk actually isn't a bad talent if you don't want basically either of your 2 detox or pressure points. But this is always a really good trade. When we move our way down into the lower half of the tree, basically everything is static in the center. In tier 2, let's call it. But tier 3, you're seeing a couple of people trade. I would say Iron Shell Brew has been deemed a little bit more valuable this season, because what you're seeing is that whenever your tier set procs, despite the longer cooldown on Fortifying Brew with this talent, what you're seeing is that you're seeing a lot of procs from your tier set, meaning that you're constantly getting a 30% DR versus a 20, and it's giving you additional health, which is always great. So you're getting 30% more health, 30% damage reduction versus 20 and 20. Now, there are a couple talents down here that people are generally sticking to. Windwalking is fine, but I've loved Link Spirits there's a lot of really cool uses for this. I'll be doing a short probably in the next day or two talking about some of my favorite spots to use this talent. There's some nuance things with it as well, though. You want to put it on someone who's like fairly consistent with their positioning. It's better for push players, but also Clash is seeing a lot of use as well. Being able to root mobs in place, being able to move a mob to a specific location is also pretty good. It's kind of clunky to use. Clash used to be baseline. They made it into a talent. But generally people do like running Clash. My only gripe with it is that it has a kind of a longer cooldown. I think it should be 30 seconds in my opinion. Even if it didn't root things for 4 seconds and only was 2 seconds, I'd like to see more a reduction here. But anyways, nothing crazy in the class tree, but the spec tree is where things get a little bit more interesting. We're seeing a lot of people run Determination. You're seeing 4 of the top 5 players running Determination in their keys. I'm not sure why Big Crusher decides not to. I think having effective increased stagger effectiveness during our tier set proc is extremely valuable, and it's a little bit more valuable than things like Quicksip, but he's still opting to play Quicksip, which means that it's probably not the worst idea to still talent into this. Every once in a while, I'll slot a point into this node if I want to be a little extra tanky, but generally speaking, most players have come to the realization that Quicksip has less value being a tier 1 talent than Determination does with our tier set. Now, some talents that kind of piqued my interest a couple days ago are One with the Wind and Strike at Dawn. Now, why do both of these talents come into play? Well, it's because we need pathing on both sides of the right end of the tree. Normally what you do is you play Zenmed. And Zenmed gives you basically, while Zenmed isn't necessarily useful, especially this season, it does allow pathing. It's a pathing node, basically. So when you remove Zenmed, and you still need to path to both the left and right side of the tree, you have to put 2 points here. But what I will say is that One with the Wind and Strike at Dawn actually feels so good to play right now. And while it isn't necessarily the most popular talent currently when you're looking at this heat map in the top 50, what I've noticed is these nodes get more value than Ox Dance currently is. Yesterday, for example, on stream, I was attempting a couple of 17 and 16 Cinderbrew meteries with my group. And surprisingly, while running Ox Dance was rarely getting consumed, but One with the Wind and Strike at Dawn specifically really bolster up the diminishing return of your dodge, or they reduce the diminishing return of your dodge, making dodge more effective and your mastery more effective. So One with the Wind and Strike at Dawn has made a lot of pulls like Cinderbrew Meadery feel really good. The first, like a big first pull in Floodgate, a big first pull in Mechagon Workshop. These dungeons feel really good with One with the Wind and Strike at Dawn. So I recommend, if you'd like to, give this a shot. Maybe not with Master of Harmony. I've specifically been playing Shado-pan with it, but the extra point that you're losing is generally going to come from the lower half of the tree. You're either going to drop 1 sec of High Tolerance, or you're going to drop Ox Dance for it. Dropping Ox Dance, totally viable to do, and then you'll be looking at something like this. If you were playing Quicksip, you can drop Quicksip as well to get this point. I don't know many people who are playing like Anvil and Stave or anything else. And funny enough, when you look at a heat map like this, you would think that a lot of players are playing, 48 people are playing High Tolerance. But if you look at the breakdown, actually, it's still like 30 people-ish are playing rank 2, but 15 of those players are only playing rank 1, which is kind of interesting. I don't think you necessarily need 2 stacks of High Tolerance if you're playing Shado-pan. If you're playing Master of Harmony, you might want both. But yeah, I give this a shot. I think One with the Wind and Strike at Dawn has been fairly valuable in things like Cinderbrew Meadery, Mechagon Workshop. I really liked them in here. Zenmed, again, you don't have many uses of it, so you can definitely swap off of it if you'd like. If you're playing Master of Harmony specifically, you'll definitely want to drop Chi Surge. And that's the last thing I want to talk about here. Last time we talked, it was about an 80-20 split on hero talents. Now we are seeing a much more competitive 60-40 split. So Master of Harmony is starting to gain some traction, is starting to gain some value. I think this 2 things are happening. Increased bottom level is massive. So increased stagger effectiveness, increase of secondary stats is making Master of Harmony viable. Plus, we also recently received a buff, kind of the second reason. The buff did affect, it was a 3% buff to kind of all damaging abilities, but we also saw a direct tier set buff, and that tier set buff didn't really affect Shado-pan, but what it did do is it did improve overwhelming forces damage, and it also improved the amount of vitality you're going to be storing per global when you get tier set procs. So it was a slight buff to Master of Harmony over Shado-pan, which has definitely started swinging it a little bit more to the right. I also think like trinket setups might have a big factor in this. Maybe players who want to play Master of Harmony need a 2-minute cooldown trinket. Maybe they've been trying to farm Signet of the Priory, and they just haven't been able to get it. Maybe they now have it. So there's a lot of like factors, but I think the big two is the buffs we received plus increased itemable. Anyways, that's a Brewmaster update. Going back to the US leaderboard specifically, Poa is doing a great job. He's absolutely crushing it. He had the only Brewmaster and one of the only tanks in the US who have achieved that 3,400 rating. I am gonna hopefully be up there soon. And then there's a pretty big gap between the next. But when we're looking over at the European region, I believe it's Monksy, Mordrum, and Big Crusher who are all doing very well over there. So Brewmasters, keep up the good work. We are being drowned in a sea of purple right now, but yeah. Anyways, that's a quick little update on Brewmaster. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.